This class, they better get up here and start working. So welcome everybody. It's nice to see some faces back with us from summer break, summer hiatus. So here we are. Anybody know what book of the Bible we're in? 1 Samuel, very good. And we'll be in chapter 8 here in just a second. So I'll open us with a word of prayer and then we'll get started. God, we thank you for this day, this Lord's Day. Thank you for Jesus Christ and all that you've given us in him, our lives and our salvation, our hope and our purpose. Would you bless us this morning as we open your word, open our eyes and ears, most important, open our hearts, that we may learn and receive and grow and do different and more than what we've done up to this point. It's in Christ's name we pray. Amen. All right. Good morning, everybody. I don't know why. I almost left the house without a jacket on, and then I felt bad. I was like, I got to wear a jacket. I don't know if y'all, have those expectations of me, but I thought I had this knit tie, but that Mr. Jim Burry gave me. He's given me two of these knit ties that I like. I don't wear them very often. And then I got to thinking, I thought I'd share this. Any of y'all remember Owen Albright? I know Don knows him. A couple of y'all know Owen. Okay, good. Yeah, he's now gone on to be with the Lord. But I went on Campaigns Northeast with him I guess summer after my freshman year, I think it was. But I remember he would preach in these, the churches that we went to, smaller, kind of more conservative churches that we were at. And he would get up there with his jacket on, and it was hot in the summer. I was thinking how hot it is outside. Maybe I don't need to wear a jacket, but anyway. And but he would take off his jacket before he got to preach, and he said, "I'm going to take this off, and if anybody complains about it, I'll make you wear it." So, which I thought was hilarious. But here I am wearing my jacket, so it doesn't really work. But I thought I'd tell you that story anyway, because I got, this morning as I was picking out these clothes, I got kind of amused thinking about Owen fussing at the church saying, if you complain about me not wearing a jacket when I preach, I'll make you wear it. So I'd like to see that actually happen, him try to put this jacket on somebody who did not like him taking it off. All right, anyway, we're in 1 Samuel chapter 8, and slowly making our way forward. Some of our college friends are back, and I'm thinking they may have left in May, and with us beginning 1 Samuel, and now they're back. They're like, "You're only in chapter 8? What have y'all been doing all summer?" So we're in chapter 8. There's probably some overlap here between what we've talked about last week, just as we get a running start into, I think, kind of starting more officially in verse 10, but we'll bring you up to speed. You remember in verse 1 and 2 and 3, Samuel becomes old. He makes his sons judges over Israel. He's got two sons here that are named. It says that his sons did not walk in his ways, but they turned aside after gain. They take bribes and they pervert justice. And perhaps we said, or we wondered anyway, that where Samuel may have gone wrong here, it's hard to say, if he is kind of guilty of anything, is it says that he made his sons judges over Israel. And judges were appointed by God. They weren't this kind of passed on in the family sort of position that was inherited from generation to generation. It doesn't seem to have had that practice from the judges we read about. So perhaps there's a clue there that Samuel made his sons judge that in a way that wasn't honoring to the plans of God. And then the people end up rejecting his judgment and that of his sons. So all the elders of Israel in verse 4 gathered together, and they came to Samuel at Ramah, and they make two complaints. They say, one, you're old, and two, your sons don't walk in your ways. Now appoint for us a king to judge us like all the nations. But the thing displeased, this is verse 6, displeased Samuel when they said, give us a king to judge us. Why do you imagine it displeased Samuel when they requested a king? What's going on there? I think of like, what's going on there emotionally, if that's the right way to frame that, like for Samuel to be displeased about their request.
He was a judge, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was a judge, right? He was already a judge.
Said, hey, you're not getting a job done, Dad.
Yeah, that's not that's painful when someone says, you're the judge, but we need a king to judge. Or maybe it's they're thinking about he's old, he's not going to be around forever. They need some kind of succession plan here of what's next.
Is there something like an influence of other religions coming in? Because, other religions have a king.
Yeah, other nations around. Well, that's what they say, right? Like the other nations, like the other people around us. So they're looking around at their neighbors and they're saying, that's kind of nice. We don't have that. We're kind of, we're kind of low budget here, or we're minor league. And look at these other kind of major league, places around us. They have a king. We're just doing this with judges. We need to grow up a little bit here. Maybe the kind of sentiment, right? Yeah, Carol.
One of the things that recurs over and over again in Samuel is, and they all did what was right in their own eyes.
In the judges, yeah. They all did what was right in their own eyes. How does that connect to this?
Well, they wanted somebody to lead them. They didn't want to everybody to like leadership. They wanted someone to lead them, someone to
Yeah.
have responsibility.
Yeah, they wanted a... what do we want from our leaders? It's a question. Do we really want someone to... a lot of times we want a leader who's going to do just what we think, right? Just what we want them to do for us. And they'll take all the criticism and they'll put all the work in, but they're going to make the same decisions that we would and make our lives a lot easier. We don't actually want a leader who's going to make our lives more challenging or demand more from us. We want a champion to do all the work for us, that kind of thing. That gives us the freedom to have the life that we want. Yeah, so maybe there's some of that too, of wanting to do what's right in their own eyes, or wanting to do what's, what the nations are doing, as opposed to asking, what does God want us to do? Who does God want us to be? So yeah, one of the functions of the king, we'll see this again in just a second, is to judge. So you already have the judges who are judging, but the king is going to have the role of being a judge over the people. All right, and then moving along here in verse 7, it says at the end of verse 6 that Samuel prays to the Lord. So because Samuel is displeased with this, he takes it to the Lord, which is his immediate turn here. He doesn't engage, the way the story's told here, it's not like he engages immediately in conversation with the people and says, now let's think about this. What are the pros and cons of having a king and all of this? Is this a good idea? But he is displeased and he immediately speaks to the Lord, which is probably a good rhythm for us, right? When something happens in our lives that we don't understand or that displeases us or frustrates us, take it to the Lord in prayer, as the song says. And the Lord said to Samuel, obey the voice of the people and all they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them. Pause on that for a moment. Now, if we say in verse 1 that perhaps Samuel made a mistake in making his sons judges over Israel, and his own sons don't walk in Samuel's ways, which were God's ways, it seems like Samuel has some culpability here, right? Would the people have, you can't blame him for getting old, but would the people have complained for a king if Samuel had done better, if his sons had done better? We don't really know that. But when Samuel speaks to God and says, look at what's going on here, God speaks to Samuel. He doesn't say, well, Samuel, if you had done better. I find that kind of interesting. He doesn't get on to Samuel. He doesn't say, I'm disappointed in you. God just takes it on himself and says, look, they're not rejecting you. They're rejecting me, which is just I think a beautiful word from the Lord. And Jesus says something similar, a very different situation, but I think it's in Luke 17 when he talks about the one who receives you receives me, the one who rejects you rejects me. And we're given that same kind of promise from God, that it's really not always about us, right? God is with us in this, and if we're rejected, it may not be our fault, right? It's something else is going on. Yeah, Andy.
It's also, they've had two sets of really bad judges
Mm.
in a row.
Mm.
So you kind of maybe understand exactly where they're coming from.
Yeah.
Both of these are supposedly from God.
Yeah.
God's priests, God,
Right.
and they appointed these
Yeah.
Judges, their kids, and it turned out horribly in both cases.
Right.
So that's what, 2 generations?
Mm-hmm.
All those.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, so, and you know, God's appointments have not been working out. The system's not been working out. So it makes me just think about whose fault is this? Where's the blame for it? But apparently the people who are asking for a king are the ones that are most displeasing to, their request is most displeasing. We'll go back and look at a passage in Deuteronomy in just a second that is a little interesting to compare with this one. Carol.
Another thing is, these judges have not been complete leaders. Some of them have been one thing, some of them another. And the point I'm making is that maybe after the battle with the Philistines, what they were looking for was military.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe
Yeah.
the problem, not that they opposed Samuel being a judge, but they wanted someone that would stand out in front of them in battle.
Yeah.
And go out and gather people up when it's time to fight, someone that
Yeah.
would depend on the defender.
Right.
Even though they had bigger followers, but didn't have a leader to
Yeah.
make sure this happened. And the Philistines defeating of them sometimes lost.
Mm-hmm.
Made them think that they needed somebody to lead them in battle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's one of the things that they list as a reason of a benefit of a king, which is kind of interesting because the last chapter we just read a story of them having victory over the Philistines when Samuel was leading them, right? And he had sacrificed and prayed, and they routed the Philistines. But here they're thinking, no, but we need a military leader. But they just had an example of a time they didn't need that king as a military leader, and they had success. So, but yeah, in their thinking it was, we need this leader, representative on the front lines to fight these battles for us. Yeah. All right, so carrying on here, and then we'll go back to Deuteronomy. There's a passage I want to look at that's kind of fascinating. According to all the deeds that they have done, in verse 8, from the day I brought them out of Egypt, even to this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, and so they are also doing to you. Isn't that interesting? That reminds me of something Jesus says too. What do they say? If they malign the servants of the house, how much more will they say?
If they call the
Yeah.
master
Beelzebul.
how much more will they call the servants?
Yeah. So Jesus here is like, well, Samuel, you're sharing in my situation too. They're rejecting me. What does that feel like? That doesn't feel so good. And maybe there's a connection there for us as Christians who share in the sufferings of Christ, right, in the world, and are supposed to. Grant, yeah.
This is repeated throughout the prophecies, is that you have rejected me, you worship other gods. I did this and this for you, and you rejected me, and you've done everything. You perverted justice, you've done all this sins, done what you wanted to. And so therefore, this catastrophe is to what, 70 years of imprisonment. And God just keeps repeating how you have rejected me ever since you come out of Egypt. Even on the way out.
Yeah, right. Yeah, they didn't waste any time in complaining and rejecting God.
And it's been a continuous through all the generations.
Right.
Since then.
Yeah.
Everybody rejected. Even Samuel's sons perverted justice. And that's one of the sins that, that God says, you pervert justice, you don't take care of the orphans or the widows, the people that can't do for themselves.
Good.
Just a repeated
Yeah.
over and over again.
Yep. Even though that entire generation died in the wilderness,
Yeah.
their same mistakes are in repeated generation to generation. I think that's sort of what we see in Genesis 9 with the flood, where God, you remember the flood, right? God washes all the evil people away, right? And so the only ones that are left are the good people, 8 souls saved on the ark. And so when they came off the ark, there was never any sin in the world again, right? Everything was just perfect the way that it was supposed to be. No, I mean, we read about, Noah and Canaan there. But when they come off the ark, God says something to the effect of, man's hearts are evil continually. Like God has this realization, it seems, that no, this wickedness is something that you're going to have trouble fully eradicating from the human heart. So generation, just getting rid of a generation isn't fixing the problem. Yeah.
And we're bombarded with it, and it's one of the battles we're fighting constantly with evil. And
Yeah.
we are in a battle.
Yes.
There are going to be casualties.
Yeah. David?
Yeah, I learned the hard way myself. I went 38 years thinking I was saved. It wasn't, but the part of Jesus dying for my sins ought to be shared with everybody.
Yeah. Yep. And that's what it took, right? For Jesus to die for us to be filled with the Spirit, for us to have new hearts. And even still, we still struggle, don't we? I just want to point out, we've noticed some connections to Egypt in the story of Samuel so far. And here's one more, and it's explicit in verse 8, where God says, since the day I brought them out of Egypt. So it may not surprise us. Well, of course, Egypt, the slavery in Egypt, deliverance from Egypt looms large in their, historic imagination of who they are as a people and so on and so forth. But it has just been interesting to see the ways that this story and this text ties the story back to that moment in Egypt. And we've seen that a few different times. All right, so then God says, obey their voice. Only you shall solemnly warn them and show them the way of the kings who shall reign over them. So God says, listen, they've not rejected you, they've rejected me. Go ahead and grant them this, but warn them about what's to come. So go back to Deuteronomy chapter 17. So I'm just going to roll this grenade out there for us. I'm not really going to answer any questions or tie this up. So it's just, y'all are going to have to deal with this mess and figure out what's going on here. But cause for future study. But obviously Deuteronomy is the scene that we're to imagine here is, Moses they're on the threshold of the promised land. Moses is going to not enter with them. He's going to die. But they're going to go on in. We see that in the next book of Joshua. And so Moses is telling them, reminding them of the law and their covenant with God, so on and so forth. So they're on the threshold of the promised land, and Moses is telling them, watch out for this, be faithful to God, so on and so forth. In chapter 17, verse 14, Moses says, when you come to the land that the Lord your God is giving you, and you possess it and dwell in it, and then say, I will set a king over me like all the nations that are around me. You may indeed set a king over you whom the Lord your God will choose. One from among your brothers you shall set as a king over you. You may not put a foreigner over you who's not your brother, only he must not acquire many horses for himself or cause the people to return to Egypt in order to acquire many horses. Since the Lord has said to you, you shall never return that way again, and he shall not acquire many wives for himself, lest his heart turn away, nor shall he acquire for himself excessive silver and gold. So there's some clauses put on this. God says you can have a king, but make sure they don't, get amass a lot of possessions, have a bunch of wives, do things that are going to lead the heart of the people away from me, or even like take the people back to Egypt, which is really fascinating that the king may be like, well, my first day in office, we're going to go back to Egypt. So how would that even work? But what's interesting here is in the story of Samuel, you have the people asking for this king that's, I think we've all read this, and there it seems to be this very negative thing of the sinful people's idea to have a king. That's not God's idea. That's not Samuel's idea. That God ends up saying, well, because, fine, if they really want one, then they've already rejected me, so go ahead and have a king. But if you go back to Deuteronomy 17, it's like God says, when you get in there and you ask for a king, it's all right, go ahead and get one. So it doesn't seem to be as negatively presented, except for the ways that it might kind of be abused, or the king may go off course. So that's the grenade that I'm just going to roll out there and say, y'all put that together sometime this week. I'm not sure what to make of it. But Carol's going to answer this, tidy all this up for us. Please.
When you say it's not God's idea, I think it was God's idea, but he wanted it to be his idea, not the people rejecting him to get king, but it's his idea to pick someone to lead them.
That's good, yeah. God wasn't necessarily against the idea, but he wanted it to be his idea.
I'm pretending he actually supported the idea.
Okay.
He intended them to have a king.
Yes.
Intended to have a king to live forever.
Johnny says no. What do you think? I like this. Let's have some fight here. Yeah, it's a rejection of God.
Choosing.
Yeah.
But it was just like the temple and the tabernacle. God instituted the tabernacle and told them, gave them all the instructions.
Yeah.
But we see he accommodated the temple.
Right.
He was their king.
That's good.
They rejected him.
Yeah.
He accommodated their choice.
Yeah.
And he even went so far in order to aid them, as to tell them, here's what it's going to be like.
Right. Yeah.
So he accommodated it. I don't know. Of course, he spelled out the things in the temple. He spelled out the things in the kingship. He knew it was coming.
Right. And there's a tension maybe in Deuteronomy between what does God foresee versus what does he really initiate. If he foresees them having a king, then maybe that, foreknowledge is not the same as, what's the contrast there, Brother Jeff? Foreknowledge is not the same as predetermination or so on. Like God knowing something will happen doesn't mean he makes something happen. Those are on different tracks. I don't know.
Here, this 1 Samuel 8 and 7 is the pinpoint of the origin of the downfall of Israel. Mm-hmm. Especially the 10 northern tribes. Mm-hmm. Once the nation is divided, after the days of Solomon, the 10 tribes that formed and stayed to the north never had a king that wasn't evil. Judah had a couple of good kings.
Mm-hmm.
Josiah, Hezekiah.
Yeah.
But, it was their downfall.
Yeah. Well, and there is, and I want to encourage us as we continue to read here for the next, read 1 Samuel for the next 7 years, until the fullness of time is fulfilled, and we can move on to Kings or something. That just to listen to how the kingship is presented, because I think it is I love these brothers here, Johnny and Carol, who are disagreeing or somewhat disagreeing in love. See, this is what church is, And but there's a tension I think there is a tension in Scripture and even in Samuel of the ways that the king is very positively portrayed, and then other times that it's not. So how do we synthesize these? And then all of let's say, it is a rejection, but then how God works through the king and like David and all of the promises about a king like David always being on the throne. This is part of God's like eternal, wonderful promises that Jesus ends up fulfilling. That depends on there being a king in the throne, right? Somebody to take that office in a different way, right? But anyway, so it's this tension. I hope we feel it, and I love a demonstration of the tension here. So let's keep going. We've got about 16 minutes left. And I think we can get through 10 to 18 fairly quickly. But God has just told Samuel, we're back in 1 Samuel chapter 8, and he just told them, but solemnly warn them and show them the way of the king who shall reign over them. So what we get in this next passage is what we would call the right of the king. I don't know if your subheading says that or if you're familiar with that language, but the right of the king. That is the kind of power and rights that the king has, the things that he can demand and make happen, even things that are not good for the people or that people would not enjoy. So, let's read this. Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking for a king from him. He said, "These will be the ways of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots and to be his horsemen and to run before his chariots. And he will appoint for himself commanders of thousands and commanders of 50s, and some to plow his ground and to reap his harvest and to make his implements of war and the equipment of his chariots. And he will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. And he will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive orchards and give them to his servants. And he will take the 10th of your grain and of your vineyards, and give it to his officers and to his servants. And he will take your male servants and your female servants, and the best of your young men and your donkeys, and put them to his work. And he will take the 10th of your flocks, and you shall be his slaves. And in that day you will cry out, because your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves, but the Lord will not answer you in that day." That sounds like the fine print on this agreement, right? All of these things that the king may do or will do that the people will not like, okay? So it just lists all of these things. I mean, several, I didn't count them all, but these things that Samuel says, watch out, this is going to come. And so because Samuel told them all this, the people said, "You're right, this is a bad idea. We don't want this after all." Is that what happened? No, right? They want it anyway. So let's read that. Does anybody have any comments on 10 to 18? That's one that we may move more quickly through because it's the right of the kings and all of these things that Samuel says the king can demand your sons and put them to work and take a 10th of your stuff and all of this. The best he's going to have for himself, and you're going to be left with the leftovers. Just to warn them of how the king will operate. Yeah. Yes. Right. Yeah, a lot of riches, a lot of wives, Deuteronomy, chariots. So, yeah, Solomon, and Solomon was supposed to be one of the good ones, right?
And God just took 10% or whatever required of him, and he took care of the battles, took care of their children, he took care of all this stuff it's really important to us. But the king is going to do all this, going to take your children, not just the 10%, but he's going to.
Yep. Yeah, that's painful, right? I mean, to think about your taking your children and kind of using them as dispendable in his armies, and for the people to hear this who have children or who will have children, and for that to not, seem to cost anything for them, that they just say, it don't matter, take my boy and, let him give his life in battle. You think that would have woken somebody up, if anything would have. So verse 19, the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel. Isn't that interesting, the way that that's said? Refused to obey. Did Samuel say, like, did Samuel just give a command that they were supposed to obey? Had he said, like, go outside and clap or something? No, he just listed all these things that the king would do. I don't think did anywhere in there, did he say, don't do this? Or God, he talks to God and God says, go ahead. And then he just says, just warn him about the negative consequences of having a king. But this idea of obey, it may be, does anybody have another word for obey there? Listen, yeah. Or heed is a great word. Obey is interesting because it's not like a command that but heed or listen or really hear. It's like they have made up in their minds what they want. And there's no talking them out of it. Sidebar here. That ever happened to us today, where we get our mind fixed on something, we want something, even though there's that little voice that's saying, you're being hasty, you're not listening, this may not be a good idea, and you have friends who try to say, don't do that, this is not a good thing. And we've seen it many times where the heart wants what it wants, and you can't talk somebody out of it. They've got to go through it themselves and experience the consequences. Yeah, yes, sir.
My mind just keeps going on this. It's just yet another example of the depth of human arrogance, and then also God's love. He took it back to Egypt. You could go back to the Garden of Eden, where Satan tempts by saying, "Don't you want to be like God? Don't you want to not be dependent on God? Don't you want to know good and evil? Just do it your own way."
Yeah.
And we see that time and time again.
Yeah.
Even Aaron's heart now.
Yeah.
Where I say, I think I'll do it my way.
Yeah.
The arrogance to think that that would be better than the way God does. But God, in His love, still says, "Let me warn you. This
Right.
is what you're signing up for."
Right.
And arrogantly, as humans, we say, "Okay, I think I'll try that."
Yeah.
Bring us to the New Testament, where eventually we say, "Thanks be to God for a righteousness that comes not from me, not dependent on how good I'm going to do this, but dependent on Christ." So eventually we say, "You're right, God. I need
Right.
you,
Yeah.
and I can't do this on my own like I keep thinking I can."
Yeah. Yeah, and maybe after we've gone down that path and realized it's a dead end, I'm thinking of the way that parents will try to tell their children, and the parents they don't know, and or friends try to intervene, and hopefully there's a point, and sometimes there's not in this. Does seem to be in this life where the person realizes that they've made a mistake, and then they can maybe go back to the parents, maybe go back to the friends, and say, I see you had my best interest in mind, and I was blind to that. And maybe that's how it is with God. And hopefully, then the next time it happens, we're better at listening. But there is something about our hearts sometimes get so attached to something, even something not good for us, that it just makes us have a hard time listening and taking counsel from others. Donnie, did you have a comment?
Yeah, you kind of remind us also later in the days of the prophets, and I think it was Jeremiah, that God was sending to the people, and he told the prophet, they're not going to listen to you. And to paraphrase it, the prophet said, well, then why go?
Yeah.
And God's response he said, so that they'll know there was a prophet among them.
That's a good word.
It was his love for the people. He wanted them to know, so that, they have the opportunity to accept him and reject this other stuff.
Yeah.
They didn't do it, even in the days of the prophets and on down to today.
Right.
You know, a lot
Very
like
good.
raising children.
Yeah.
You tell them, don't do do that, don't do this, and you give them all this good advice, but they choose not to listen. At some point, you have to let them bear the consequences of making bad choices so that they learn to listen.
Yeah, yes, sir.
I find out the older I get, the smarter my dad was.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Well, there's what do they say? Your kids, kind of before they become teens, mom and dad are great, and then there's a season there where your mom and dad are just the dumbest people that ever lived, and then hopefully there's a time after that where you realize no, actually they knew what they were talking about. But yeah, the older we get, the more we. And I think we have to live through things, right? Is part of the problem is once we get to, a similar situation that our parents were in, then we see, it makes sense why they would have done this with their kids or with us. Good comment. We never we'll never get as old as God, right? God's eternal. So we're not going to get there. I think that's maybe why faith is so vital, is will we go ahead and trust God even when we're kind of never to the place where God is in his perspective on the world, if that makes sense. All right, so let's carry on. We got 5 minutes. Carry on here in verse 19. So obey the voice. They refused to obey. They refused to listen. They said, no. Mine says no, exclamation point. And it's, it says they, the people, I don't know, maybe this is a summary of their attitude, right? I don't think all the people were speaking at the same time, the same words, but the sentiment of the people here is no, but there shall be a king over us. And they repeat the reasons for this, and maybe add one from earlier in verse 20, that we may be like all the nations, that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. So those are at least 3 things that the king would do for them. There's a kind of maybe status that the king would have in comparison to the other peoples around them that also had kings. So they wanted to be like the other nations. Don't you think they should have heard that coming out of their mouths and thought, that does sound right. We're going to be like the other nations. Maybe we shouldn't be like the other nations in this way. But that's their desire. So they felt maybe inferior to other nations around them with kings. They saw the benefits of the kings in neighboring places. The Philistines, did they have a king that we've read about so far in this story? They had 5 lords of that Pentapolis, those 5 cities, which in Samuel, well, we have Egypt, right, that has a king, Pharaoh. But, the nations around them, the Philistines, I don't know that they have a king, or the story hasn't told us about a king. So they're saying like the people around them, but maybe they're having selective memory there of, well, not everybody has a king, actually. You're kind of making that up to bolster your, argument. Yeah, David.
Yeah, one thing too, even though God allowed them the king, he was to choose the king.
Right.
But they made a mistake in the fact that they chose wasn't what God.
Yeah. Well, and God does end up choosing the king. So we'll read about that in chapter 9. He chooses Saul. And that whole story, I was reading that again this morning in chapter 9, in the 0.05% chance we made it that far. Just that whole, the narrative about Saul and, the donkeys and all of this. And the way that that's presented, once we get there, next week or sometime, it's very, very positively is surprising with the king, how Saul is presented and the choice of Saul and what God does for Saul. It's all very, very positive. And it's almost as if God has a short memory. Is that fair to say? God has a short, even if God was displeased that they had rejected him and the king, once God had decided to grant them this king, God wasn't half in on that, right? Yeah, Debbie. Yeah, gave you a king in my anger, and I took him away. So yeah, that sentiment's around this story too, in anger. So listen for that next week when we're in chapter 9. If you sense the anger of God, because when I read that story, I don't really perceive that as much. Yeah, okay. My mind was going somewhere else, but I'll hold back on telling that story. So as we close here with the last minute or so, so they want to be like the other nations. They want the king to judge us and then fight in the battles. That goes back to what Carol had said about fighting in the battles. And when Samuel had heard all the words of the people, he repeated them in the ears of the Lord. So then, Samuel's mediating. He's taken this back to God. Of course, God would have heard, right? God knows and hears. But Samuel takes it to the Lord in some sort of direct speech and prayer. And the Lord said to Samuel, "Obey their voice and make them a king." And Samuel said to the men of Israel, "Go, every man to his city." So there's this great, this end of this, there's like this great scene change is what it feels like, right? Where everyone leaves. The stage goes dark and empty for a second. Everyone leave. And so it's like, what's going to happen next? And that's where we turned in chapter 9 to read about the appointment of Saul. Yes, you get the last word.
It's like they're not even listening.
Yeah.
Because they're thinking these kings are going to go out and fight their battles.
Mm-hmm.
Samuel, he's already told them that's not
Right. Yeah, exactly.
But they're blinded
Yeah.
by their wants and their desires.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't think God's being short-minded. I think he's trying to give them what they want to make them happy.
Yeah.
But they're never happy.
Mm-hmm. Yep. How do you work with the people like that? Uh-huh. Well, thank you all for your participation today, and we'll see you in here, Lord willing, next week. Chapter 9. Jackie, remind, chapter 9. That's right.